Have you ever been so lost in your own thoughts that you forgot how to move forward? So paralyzed by the fear of making the wrong choice that you stopped making any choices at all? This is the story of a man whose job was to help others find their way, but who became so consumed by the pursuit of perfection that he lost himself completely. His name was Elias, and he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Sometimes, the map that leads you home is the one you're afraid to draw. Elias was 43 years old when his world began to collapse, though he didn't realize it at the time. He was a master cartographer, renowned throughout the kingdom for his elegant, functional maps. Merchants used them to find profitable trade routes. Travelers relied on them to cross dangerous terrain safely. Military commanders planned campaigns using his precise renderings of mountains, rivers, and roads. His work was simple, clear, and above all, useful. People didn't frame his maps as art, they used them to get somewhere. And that was exactly how Elias liked it. But somewhere along the way, something shifted inside him. Perhaps it was the weight of his reputation. Perhaps it was the natural progression of a mind that had spent decades noticing details others missed. Or perhaps it was simply fear dressed up as ambition. Whatever the cause, Elias began to see flaws in everything he created. A line slightly imperfect, a mountain range not quite to scale, a forest path that might confuse someone if the light hit it wrong. The maps that once took him days to complete now took weeks, then months, and then finally they stopped being completed at all. His workshop told the story better than words ever could. The walls were covered with dozens, then hundreds of drafts. Crumpled parchment littered the floor like fallen leaves. Ink stains covered every surface, including Elias himself. His hands shook constantly now, not from age but from exhaustion. He hadn't delivered a finished map in 3 years. 3 years. Colleagues who once sought his advice now whispered about him in taverns. Former clients hired other cartographers. His reputation, once unshakable, was crumbling like old parchment. But Elias barely noticed. He was too busy trying to create something perfect. Then came the commission that would change everything. The Duke himself arrived at Elias's workshop on a crisp autumn morning, accompanied by 2 guards and a secretary. The request was simple: create a map of the royal forest for the upcoming grand hunt. Nothing too elaborate, just clear paths, notable landmarks, and danger zones marked for the safety of the hunting party. The timeline was generous, 6 months. The payment was more than fair. For any other cartographer, this would have been a straightforward job, completed in a matter of weeks. But for Elias, it represented something else entirely. This was his chance. His opportunity to create not just a map, but a masterpiece, his legacy. The work that would remind the kingdom why his name had once meant excellence. He accepted the commission with trembling hands and promised the Duke a map unlike any he had ever seen. The Duke smiled, shook his hand, and left. Elias stood in his workshop, staring at blank parchment, and felt the weight of infinite possibility pressing down on his chest. What if he missed something? What if a nobleman took a wrong turn because the map wasn't detailed enough? What if? What if? What if? The questions multiplied in his mind like weeds in an untended garden. The next day, Elias ventured into the royal forest with his measuring tools, notebooks, and drawing supplies. It was a beautiful forest, ancient and vast, with oak trees that had stood for centuries and streams that sang over smooth stones. Most cartographers would have walked the main paths, noted the key features, and returned home to begin drawing. But Elias wasn't most cartographers anymore. As he walked, his mind began cataloguing everything. Not just trees, but the species of trees. Not just streams, but the depth of streams at different points. Not just paths, but every possible variation of every path depending on season, weather, and time of day. He saw rabbit warrens that might cause a horse to stumble. He noticed how afternoon shadows fell across certain clearings, potentially disorienting riders. He documented moss patterns on the north side of trees, wind patterns through different groves, the way sunlight filtered through leaves at different hours. By sunset on that first day, Elias had traveled less than a quarter mile into the forest. His notebooks were already filled with observations. His mind was spinning with data. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the excitement of thorough work, a small voice whispered a question he could not yet hear. At what point does attention to detail become paralysis? When does the pursuit of perfection become the enemy of purpose? 6 months passed like water through cupped hands. The deadline came. The Duke sent a messenger. Elias, surrounded by dozens of incomplete drafts, each more complex than the last, promised he just needed a few more weeks. The messenger left with a skeptical expression. Elias returned to his work, convinced that he was on the verge of a breakthrough. Just a few more adjustments, just a bit more detail, just a little more time to get it exactly right. But time, as it always does, revealed the truth. This wasn't about getting it right. This was about being too afraid to be wrong. 1 year passed, then 2. Elias no longer left his workshop except to make brief, frantic trips back to the forest for additional measurements. His map had grown beyond anything reasonable. It now covered the entire floor of his workshop, an impossibly detailed rendering that included individual leaves on significant trees, the precise angle of shadows at different times of day, seasonal variations in stream depth, and notation for every possible path a person might take through the forest, including paths that probably didn't exist at all. Former colleagues came to check on him. They would stand in his doorway, shocked by what they saw, and gently suggest that perhaps he was overthinking this. Elias would laugh, a brittle sound that didn't reach his eyes, and explain that they simply didn't understand the level of precision required for truly excellent work. They would leave, shaking their heads, and Elias would return to his map, adding another detail, then another, then another. His wife had left 8 months earlier. He barely remembered her goodbye. She had stood at the threshold of his workshop and said something about how he loved his perfect map more than he loved their imperfect life together. The words had bounced off him like rain off stone. He had work to do, he had perfection to achieve. Everything else could wait. But perfection, it turned out, was a horizon that moved further away the closer you walked toward it. The more detail Elias added to his map, the more details he noticed were missing. The more he tried to capture every possibility, the more possibilities emerged. His map had become larger and more complex than the actual forest it was meant to represent. A tool designed to simplify navigation had become so complicated that it would take hours just to understand how to read it. And still, Elias couldn't stop. Because stopping meant admitting something he wasn't ready to admit, that he was afraid. Not of failure, but of completion. Not of making a mistake, but of making a choice. Because once he declared the map finished, once he committed to one version of reality among the infinite versions he could imagine, that would mean accepting that all the other versions would remain forever unmade. The paralysis had become total. He wasn't creating anymore, he was hiding behind the excuse of thoroughness, hiding behind the mask of perfectionism, hiding from the terrifying freedom of simply drawing a line and saying, "This is good enough, this will help someone, this is done." Then came the afternoon that changed everything. Elias was hunched over his map, adding microscopic notations about lichen growth patterns when he heard a small voice from the doorway of his workshop. "Excuse me, sir, I'm lost. Can you help me?" He looked up, annoyed at the interruption, and saw a young girl, perhaps 8 years old, with dirt on her dress and worry in her eyes. She explained that she was looking for her grandmother's cottage on the eastern edge of the forest and had gotten turned around on the paths. Elias, still trapped in his obsession, immediately moved to his massive floor map. Of course. Come here, child. I have precisely what you need. This is the most accurate, most detailed map of the forest ever created. You see here, if you follow this path, accounting for the seasonal variation in undergrowth density and the afternoon shadow patterns of the oak groves, you can navigate toward. He continued explaining, his finger tracing elaborate routes across his masterwork, his voice filling with the manic energy of someone who had spent too long alone with their thoughts. The girl stared at the map, her small face scrunched in confusion. She looked from the incomprehensible maze of lines and notations on the floor to Elias's eager, expectant expression. Then she said the words that would shatter his entire world. "I can't understand this, sir. It's too confusing. Do you have a simpler one?" Silence filled the workshop. Those simple words hung in the air like smoke. Elias felt something crack inside his chest. All this work, all these years, all this detail and precision and pursuit of perfection, and a lost child couldn't use it to find her way home. What good was a perfect map that no one could read? What was the point of capturing every possible detail if it made the map itself impossible to use? He looked at the girl's worried face and felt something he hadn't felt in years, the simple desire to actually help someone instead of impressing them. Moving almost on instinct, he grabbed a fresh piece of parchment and a charcoal pencil. His hand moved quickly, without overthinking, without second-guessing. 5 lines, 3 landmarks: the old oak with the split trunk, the stream with the wooden bridge, the hill with the white stones. 1 clear path from the village to the eastern edge. It took him 60 seconds. 60 seconds. After 2 years of obsessive work on his perfect map, he had just created something useful in 60 seconds. He handed it to the girl. Her face transformed. "Oh, now I see. The bridge, then the big tree, then the hill. Thank you, sir." She clutched the simple map to her chest and hurried out of his workshop, her steps light with relief and purpose. Elias watched her go. Then he turned back to face his workshop. The massive, perfect, unusable map covering his floor. The walls papered with failed attempts and endless iterations. The years of his life sacrificed on the altar of an impossible standard. And in that moment, standing in the ruins of his obsession, Elias finally understood. He hadn't been trying to create the perfect map. He had been trying to avoid living an imperfect life. Every detail he added, every revision he made, every week he spent refining and adjusting and perfecting was just another day he didn't have to face the terrifying truth that life is uncertain, that mistakes are inevitable, that choosing one path means releasing all the others, and that sometimes good enough is not just acceptable, it's exactly what's needed. His perfectionism wasn't excellence, it was fear. Fear of judgment, fear of failure, fear of the irreversible nature of every decision, and that fear had stolen years from him. Years he could have spent creating useful work, maintaining relationships, actually living instead of endlessly preparing to live. The next morning, Elias made a decision. He carefully rolled up his massive, perfect map, the one he had spent 2 years creating, and placed it in a wooden chest in the corner of his workshop. He didn't destroy it. That felt wrong, like denying the journey that had brought him to this moment. But he also didn't display it. He simply acknowledged it for what it was, a monument to the prison his own mind had built. Then he opened the windows he hadn't opened in months, letting fresh air and sunlight flood the workspace. He cleared the floor. He cleaned the ink stains. He organized his tools. And then, with a clear mind and steady hands, he returned to the royal forest. This time, he walked differently. He didn't catalogue every leaf or measure every shadow. He noticed the essential features, the paths that mattered, the landmarks that would actually help someone navigate. He trusted his expertise instead of questioning every observation. He trusted that good judgment was better than infinite data. Within 3 days, he had everything he needed. Within a week, he had completed a new map of the royal forest. It wasn't perfect. There were probably details he missed. There might be better ways to represent certain features, but it was clear. It was functional. It would help people find their way through the forest safely. And that was enough. Word of his recovery spread quickly. The Duke, hearing that Elias had emerged from his years-long paralysis, sent another messenger with a new commission. This time, Elias accepted it with clear eyes and a calm heart. He completed it in 2 weeks. The Duke himself came to collect it, examining the map with an approving eye. "This is excellent work, Elias. Clear, useful, exactly what I need. I must ask, what changed? What finally broke through after all these years?" Elias smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached his eyes. "Your Grace, I learned the difference between being thorough and being trapped. I stopped trying to capture everything and started focusing on helping people get somewhere. I realized that overthinking isn't about being careful or conscientious. It's about being afraid. Afraid of mistakes, afraid of judgment, afraid that one imperfect choice will define us forever. But the truth is, perfection that paralyzes is just another word for prison, and I'd been locked in that prison for far too long." The Duke nodded thoughtfully and left with his map. Elias stood in his now orderly workshop and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the peace of having all the answers, but the peace of accepting that he never would. Not the peace of perfect certainty, but the peace of trusting himself to navigate uncertainty. The mind, he had learned, is like a map. It's meant to guide you forward, not trap you in place. It's meant to help you choose a direction, not paralyze you with infinite possibilities. In the months that followed, Elias rebuilt his reputation and his life. He took on reasonable commissions and completed them with skill and efficiency. He reconnected with colleagues he had pushed away. He even reached out to his wife, though that bridge, it turned out, had been burned beyond repair. He accepted that with sadness, but without the crushing weight of overthinking what he might have done differently. Some paths, once abandoned, cannot be retraced. That was okay. There were still paths ahead. One afternoon, that same young girl returned to his workshop, this time with her grandmother. They thanked him again for the simple map that had helped her find her way. The grandmother noticed Elias's organized workspace, the single, elegant map on the wall, the light streaming through clean windows, and said, "It's beautiful here now, so much space to breathe." Elias smiled. Space to breathe? Yes, that was exactly what he had created by letting go of the need for perfection. He began teaching the girl the basics of cartography. Not the obsessive, detail-oriented approach that had nearly destroyed him, but the fundamental skill of observing what matters and communicating it clearly. She was a quick learner, unencumbered by the fear that had plagued him. Watching her draw simple, confident lines on parchment, Elias felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Gratitude for the breakdown that had led to the breakthrough. Gratitude for the child who had shown him that simplicity was not a failure of ambition, but the highest form of wisdom. The lesson Elias learned, the one that had cost him years but ultimately freed him, was this: your mind is powerful, but it can also be your prison. overthinking masquerades as diligence, as intelligence, as care. But at its core, it's fear. Fear of the imperfect. Fear of the irreversible. Fear of living a life that doesn't match the infinite perfect versions you've imagined. The antidote isn't to stop thinking, it's to start trusting. Trust that you have enough information. Trust that you can handle mistakes. Trust that done is better than perfect. Trust that the journey forward, even with its wrong turns and imperfect maps, is better than standing still while you wait for absolute certainty that will never come. Real peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It comes from accepting that you'll figure it out as you go. It comes from drawing the line, even if your hand trembles slightly. It comes from helping someone find their way home, even if the map isn't perfect. It comes from understanding that life is not a problem to be solved with enough analysis, but a path to be walked with courage and self-compassion. So here's the question Elias would ask you. Now the question he asks himself every morning when he opens his workshop and looks at the simple, elegant map on his wall. What map are you still perfecting instead of using to actually go somewhere? What decision are you overthinking? What path are you afraid to choose because it means releasing all the other paths you might have taken? What are you avoiding by hiding behind the mask of thoroughness? The forest is waiting. The path is there. You know enough. You are enough. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is draw the simple line, take the first step, and trust yourself to navigate what comes next. The perfect map doesn't exist, but a good enough map, the one you actually use, the one that helps you move forward, that map can change your life. Stop perfecting, start walking. The peace you're searching for isn't at the end of infinite analysis. It's in the courage to begin with what you have. Your map is ready. The only question left is, will you use it?